have a series of questions for you, Jason, today. They're all related to your career, obviously. And then I think it's just going to get personal and powerful. And this is something that I distribute in the back end. Just so you know, just give you a heads up. I put this in a podcast format. But this is something
Absolutely.
that, yeah. And my goal is always like, hey, to share valuable resources, basically. I mean, based on the career, and then if it's any vertical industry. I mean, it's all talk about leadership anyway. So there's just a lot of things that we can, anybody that's listening to it can learn from somebody else's journey. And then I think your journey is very impeccable because you're traveling. And then I was reading we couldn't find, my team and I, we couldn't find, okay, so the first thing we always do is look up their LinkedIn page, basically, right? For the profile photo.
Right.
Because it's like, I know you're busy. I don't want to talk. I don't want to just like, hey, where's the photo? Where's this? Like, bombard it with the paperwork and everything. I don't like it when I get invited anyway, too. So I can understand, like, especially when you're traveling so much and everything. It's like, can you just get it from the internet? Because that's a lot of people always ask me. It's like, just get them from the internet. But a lot of people also have their own photo that they want to, share. The only photo that they want to share on this social media or online. So I always ask first, by the way, just common courtesy kind of thing. All right, we can start. I have some questions for you. Okay, selamat pagi, everybody. We're going to start now with this Leadership 365 podcast episode with Jason Scott Cohen. Selamat pagi semua. This is something that I think he and I have been waiting to doing this for a while, right, Jason? But we just haven't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys know how it is. Coordinate the perfect time for both of us. That works. Anyway, selamat pagi. Terima kasih telah hadir bersama saya lagi. Saya harap Anda menikmati podcast hari ini, hari semuanya ini. Terima kasih. I gotta say this, Jason, because you and I talk about this. Arun Sawateka. Good morning, you guys. Kap kun ka. Is that correct? That's the only thing that I learned even including when I was in Hanoi. Thank you for listening here, you guys. We're about to interview someone that can be valuable to this podcast. Bonjour à tous. Merci beaucoup d'avoir écouté. Ici avec hola a todas, buenos días, gracias por estar aquí y escuchar mi podcast hoy, meaning that thank you so much, guys, for listening, for just being here with us again. I hope you will enjoy the podcast brought by Leadership 365 today. So welcome back to Leadership 365, where leadership isn't a title. It's really simply how you live your life. I'm your host, Nicky Dare, the one and only. Today's episode gets personal and it gets powerful. We're not just talking about leadership in the boardroom, we're talking about leadership in legacy. That's exactly why we titled it as such. My guest is Jason Scott Cohen, a sharp and seasoned trust and estates attorney based in Texas, correct?
That's right. That's right, Nikki. Yeah.
In Texas.
That's right. Yeah.
Whose legal work spans borders and protects what matters most, which is your life's work, your career, your family, and your future. That's what we're going to talk about here. This isn't just about wills and documents. It's about designing a resilient future that speaks for you when you longer can. So I think that says a lot there. Let's get into it, shall we?
Absolutely.
Right. I have a series of questions for you, Jason. I know you work internationally. You mentioned it to me. So I guess the question is, what is the biggest misconception? And I think I did ask you this prior, and I asked you the first one when the first time when I first met you. What is the biggest misconception that most people have about estate planning, and how does it affect leaders globally?
Well, I think the most common misconception is that if somebody doesn't take action, if they don't have an express plan already in place, that everything will just happen naturally the way they want it. And it doesn't work that way. So if somebody He doesn't have an estate plan, provisions for what happens to their property after they pass away or after they become incapacitated and they can't care for themselves. The state has a plan for them wherever they live, wherever they're staying. There's going to be a estate plan that is essentially the default plan that the government has written. And very rarely do people want that plan to govern their family affairs. It is not the most advantageous at all. And in many instances, it's not intuitive. And so if somebody thinks that, for example, their wife is going to just step into their shoes and she's going to receive all the property to handle, it doesn't always work that way, especially if they have a blended family, if they're children from outside the marriage. So basically, the misconception is somebody doesn't need to do any planning and everything will be okay once they pass away or once they become incapacitated, and that rarely happens. And the other misconception is that people feel that their family members will be able to clean everything up with an attorney once that happens, once they either pass away or once they become incapacitated. And it turns out that it is much, much more expensive and burdensome and even potentially humiliating if they haven't made plans beforehand, because oftentimes the court has to get involved. Yeah. And when the court gets involved, it's public.
Messy.
It's messy and it's slow, and the courts are not exactly predictable. So even when there is a legal issue that should be resolved a certain way, there's no guarantee that the judge is going to apply the law correctly or that a jury is going to decide and try facts correctly. So there's a possibility, again, of some serious uncertainty, and that uncertainty can be devastating for families. It can be devastating in the sense that it can be very slow. It can be very humiliating, and it can be financially devastating because the wrong people can receive property. And it's terrible when huge amounts of estate resources go to pay attorney's fees. That is not a favorable outcome at all. Yeah. And even as an attorney, it never feels good to bill. It never feels good to bill for a situation that you know in your heart could have been avoided a long time ago with very little money. So yeah, it's just really, I don't know any attorneys that enjoy billing like that. I think that they all pretty much feel, the upstanding members of the probate bar pretty much feel, this is really sad. I wish that it didn't go this way. I wish they'd just done a little bit of planning. And,
go ahead.
Yeah, and just to use that as as an example for other people, is that it doesn't take very much to put a plan into place, and most likely it's multiple times less expensive than waiting until after the fact.
What do they say? It's like a cheap insurance to have, not to have.
It really is. Yeah. I've seen people that put wills together. I've probated a will from the 70s. I've probated a will from the early 90s, and they weren't the best wills that I've ever seen. Obviously, the laws changed a lot between now and then. And they didn't need to be worried about tax consequences because of the size of the estate. But for the most part, their life situation hadn't changed in 30 or 40 years. And the will actually still made sure that the right people got their property. We were able to prove up the will very easily. And it goes to show that if somebody has a good plan in place, it can still work for a very long time, assuming that they haven't had any life changes. So obviously, if people are impacted by divorce or deaths, or somebody becomes disabled and has special needs, or there are financial difficulties or medical difficulties or something to that effect, it always makes sense to revisit the plan and to see if there's a better way to optimize it so that it's more efficient and it's more cost effective and it provides more certainty, more guidance. So Yeah.
Yeah, in your work, have you ever seen unpreparedness that create chaos? I mean, you mentioned a little bit briefly about that in families or even businesses. I Any story that stands out to you about that? I mean,
Well, I would say it happens all the time. I would say almost every day. So my practice started out where I was focused on drafting estate plans for people, doing tax planning for people. It started with basic trust planning, and I got into some more advanced trust planning and got into helping some high net worth families plan their estates and business succession plans. People that had large amounts of property and large amounts of money that they needed to protect and to preserve, and also beneficiaries that were disabled that needed to be protected. It was very exciting and very rewarding to work with people who were proactive like that. And it's sort of like in this world, you either are of a prepper mindset or you're not. And if you're of a prepper mindset, that carries through to everything that you do. It carries through to the resources that you conserve and the resources you save and the things you stockpile and the way that you protect your finances and the way you protect your legal rights and the way that you protect your legacy. So being in Texas, the higher net worth families are generally of that mindset. Texas is a place where people have very much a prosperity and prep type mindset. So it wasn't difficult to have those conversations with families that had wealth to protect.
Already.
They understood it already. They already believe in it, right? So the question for the most part is, how do we do this in the most optimal way that's going to protect our assets, that's going to keep things private as well? That's the other thing about Texans is they like privacy. They're a little bit more concerned about that. I think for the most part, Texans are still have that sort of frontier mentality where, they're really on their own and they're there to protect themselves and their families. And so,
like a self-sufficient mentality.
Yeah, self-sufficient mentality, absolutely. So, they're prepared. They're prepared for food shortages, water shortages. I mean, I was in Dallas during the pandemic, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. We were already prepared for things like that. We had water.
Like 80%. You guys are prepared already, right? Like
I mean, I remember nationally there was a run on toilet paper, and it's like we have all that.
Exactly. That was my next question, by the way, and then you already covered it really well. In this era of uncertainty, as we already know, natural disasters, the pandemics, the COVID, and all of the shutdown, even including geopolitical conflict, how can estate planning become a form of this crisis leadership thing? And you already said it, as a state, as a community, they already have the self-reliant mindset. But no,
I think that's exactly true. I think most of the people that I spoke with leading up to the pandemic lockdown, I had calls with a number of clients, and I said, listen, I think it's really important for you to take stock on your preps and make sure that you have enough water and enough food for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever. And most of my clients said something to the effect of, I have enough food for a year.
Exactly.
I'm
Forget
well
72 hours kind of thing.
Yeah, 72 hours. We've got deep freezes in the garage. We've got 200 pounds of meat. I've got clients that said, I've got a half beef, I've got a fifth of a steer, I've got we've got everything we need for a really long time. We're stocked up. It wasn't something that was out of the ordinary at all. In fact, it was more rare to find a client who said, oh my God, I need to run to the store and get stocked up on things. It wasn't like that. So when people are of that mentality of prosperity and self-reliance, estate planning is just part of that. And it makes sense and it's easy to understand. So the question is not, oh goodness, I need to hire a lawyer to do this. The question is, how can this lawyer help me do this in the way that's going to make things as easy, as efficient, and as private as possible. So
That's true.
again, a lot of clients are not going to be satisfied with just a simple will that has to be probated in a probate court. They're going to want a trust plan or a business succession plan that can be handled privately, that doesn't require court intervention, and that becomes important to that kind of sort of mentality that you see in Texas. And I don't necessarily know that the whole country has that mentality. No. But Texans really have that mentality where they really, if they can avoid the government intervention in their existence, they're going to do it. If it costs a little bit more money, it's okay. But they know that they're going to have more certainty. They're going to have privacy. So, okay, perfect example. I probated a will early on in my career, and it was a simple will. It wasn't a great will. There was a dispute amongst the beneficiaries. They didn't like each other.
Of course.
They were listed as co-executors. They didn't want to work together. So we actually ended up having to have both of them basically say that they didn't want to be the executor and that they nominated a third party. So they nominated a CPA who became the fiduciary, and that of course cost them money. And to negotiate the terms of the office of the administrator in that situation, we had to go through a family settlement agreement, and they had to negotiate that. And at the end of the day, it cost them, I don't know, close to $10,000 to go through all that. If the decedent had met with an attorney beforehand and had basically put all those provisions together, making sure that a third-party fiduciary took over and did things the way that he wanted them, it probably would have cost $3,000. So, and it would have been quick, and it would have been without the court's intervention. Now, here's what happens: you file a probate action with the court, and granted, the Texas probate system is pretty efficient as far as states are concerned. So California has a brutal probate system.
I was going to say, I mean, it is per state, right? Based on the state where you live in, right?
Yeah, it's definitely state by state. Yeah. There are some states that have very quick, informal procedures that are easy to implement. Colorado has an aspirational type of system where you can really start an administration very quick. Wisconsin has one that's also pretty interesting. I was involved in a transnational case that involved an administration in Wisconsin as well as in Texas, and there were assets in Costa Rica, and that was one that was really interesting. California is known to have a brutal probate system that takes a very long time and is expensive.
Expensive and long time, that's what I hear.
Yeah. And so most people in California that have property use revocable living trusts to protect their assets, or not to protect their assets, but to simplify the succession process. Texas you don't necessarily need to have a revocable living trust in Texas, but most clients in the high net worth, ultra high net worth, definitely have trust and business succession plans, and they're not going to really want their will to be probated publicly. So back to this estate, the will was filed in the probate court, and immediately, as soon as a will is filed in probate court, then everybody gets to see it. It's public record. And all of the commercial businesses that specialize in buying estate property and purchasing ugly houses will buy these lists and start contacting the beneficiary and say, would you like to sell your house?
Yeah.
So I remember, I remember one of my clients, she brought to me a huge folder of mail that she got of solicitations from people, including people that would come to her door. I was going to say, that's knock on the door, literally. Yeah, knock on the door and say, I understand that your grandfather passed away, or I understand that your great uncle passed away, and that you were a beneficiary under his will. I would like to buy your interest in his house from you. And, at all times of night and early in the morning and banging on the door like they're the police. It's just, it's extremely intrusive.
I want to interject that really quickly. So there is a girl that I met, and she was with her family. She's like early, like 23, 24, I think, years old. And she was that person that you described. I thought she was just like not telling, sharing stories because she was, I don't know, whatever. I believe her now. She goes like, yeah, my parents is, and I just landed with this whole thing, and then I'm dealing with this. I think she was from Midwest, and I don't know what the rule, the law, whatever. And she was telling me about what you just explaining to us about this. And people, and all of a sudden I have relatives knock on the door at odd hours, so I cannot, and I have a huge ranch that they left me, huge property and everything. And I have to get restraining order, and I've got to get, really. And I thought she was just like exaggerating, telling stories, blah, blah, blah. It is true.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's true. So once it becomes public record, essentially, there are people that just go and buy lists of recently filed probates, and then they'll approach the beneficiaries and solicit them. And sometimes they're extremely aggressive.
She was the only one, she said. She was the only soul. And that's even worse, right? And she said, I didn't know I have relatives this many. Even my ex-boyfriend came up to me and knocked on the door and was like, hey, you owe me this. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
It was bad.
Yeah.
And I met her in Cabo, by the way.
Oh, nice.
And she was just, I'm sorry, this is off subject.
I love how you meet somebody on vacation and you form a rapport with them that they tell you these, close personal financial legal issues. That's hilarious.
It was a legal issue, she said. And that's the first thing she said. She was always drunk. She was always at the cocktail by the pool. That's how I met with her, by the way. Right. And I came downstairs and she goes, my name is so-and-so. And she was just on and on telling me about her legal situations. And that's my uncle, that's my aunt over here. We're traveling together, the big thing. And then we hired the whole floor in this resort. And I go, you did? Is that you then? Yeah, it's not a wedding. It's just kind of like a celebration after a funeral. Oh, okay. She was telling me about this. And I'm like, oh, wow. I'm so sorry to hear that. You should be celebrating in a good vibe. But then, no, it's not in a good vibe because I am being attacked by everybody. And I don't want to go back to the U.S. She goes, I would just want to stay here, find a house here or something, because I'm trying to stay away from everybody knock on the door for me. It's really messy, she says. She said it's not even worth what I'm getting because all of a sudden I'm being sued by everybody that I didn't even know. Is that right?
Well, anytime it's made record that somebody's a beneficiary, then there's a possibility that people start coming after them.
Yeah, that's what she said.
So that's again. Yeah,
these are the good people then with you on this trip. Yeah, we weren't going to stay here for 1 week, maybe extend it to another 1 week or 2 weeks. We don't want to go back.
To try to
stay out of the legal battle, she says. That's huge. And I go, okay.
And
Mississippi,
that's a perfect example.
Is that Mississippi?
It's a perfect example. Mississippi, I don't know. It's that's not exactly the Midwest.
Texas,
it's more
maybe.
like
I don't
the
know.
Deep South, but. Yeah, once something becomes public, again, everybody can see it, and we're in an information age where things are accessible online, and people can look things up on the internet, and most of the public probate proceedings now are online, and people can download them, and they can look at, they can look and see in some jurisdictions what the inventory is, or they can look and see how much a house is worth, and they can kind of figure out, hey, this person's going to receive this amount of money.
Yeah.
And that places people in danger, right? So having some privacy on these succession matters is really important, especially if it's a large amount of property.
Oh, she's a sole heir, you don't want people knowing. I'm the sole heir, she says.
Yeah.
And everybody hates me now.
You don't want you don't want people to know that you're coming into property like that. So it's definitely one of those things where on one end, you want to make sure that your property goes to the right people, right? And the second thing is you want to make sure that it goes to the right people with a certain amount of privacy and efficiency, and you don't want it to go through the court system usually.
It's messy.
So honestly, most of the cases that I see now are heavily contested cases. So while I started out doing estate planning and tax planning, most of my practice now is focused on probate litigation, where I get to see all the messes that people didn't plan for, right? So, we routinely have cases that involve heirships where, say, for example, somebody doesn't have a surviving spouse, they don't have any children, they don't have any siblings, their parents have passed away. Well, then they've got cousins that are going to receive their estate. And in some instances, we're talking about dozens of people. In some instances, we're talking about over 100 people. So I've had estates where we've had 150 plus people, that have to be served notice of the proceeding. They have to be given the final accounting, and an estate can't distribute until basically everybody's given notice of it and they're given an opportunity to contest it. So it's not uncommon for the life cycle of a case like that to take 5 years.
The amount of people that's on the list, that's all I'm saying. Wow, 100 something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's somewhat unusual that there would be an heirship that big, but it's not unusual in my practice.
It is not unusual.
So we're probably talking about maybe less than 5% of cases or 1% of cases, but most of my practice happens to be these kinds of contested heirships. So essentially, you have a situation where parents are only children and they don't have any siblings, so there are no uncles, right? And you just have cousins, and if it's older group of people, they've already passed away, and to figure out who their offspring are, and it's quite burdensome.
You gotta take a DNA testing.
Yeah, well, some of the cases have involved DNA testing. Other cases, have involved a forensic genealogist, so we get an expert witness to reconstruct the family tree based on genealogical records, based on obituaries, divorce records, marriage records, birth records. And going, the genealogist is looking at Find a Grave and is looking at, people's profiles on Facebook and the birth index and all those kinds of public records and marriage records and trying to reconstruct the family tree. And then when they get a family, sort of a draft of the family tree, they will start making phone calls and asking people who else is involved in your family. Do you have any brothers? And then it turns out that they have half brothers and half sisters, or there were illegitimate children they didn't know about.
Wow.
It's not.
How long does that take? All of those process? That's so tedious.
Years. So
years. I would imagine.
So I have a case that I got hired on in January of 2020, and it was an heirship case out of Houston, and the decedent was a physician, and she was never married, and she never had any children, and she didn't have any siblings, and her parents had passed away, and her cousins were her heirs, and most of them didn't know each other, right? Cousins on different sides of the family don't really have any relationship. And so it turned out that there were, I think, 55 heirs in that estate. And about 30 of them were represented by attorneys. I only represented one of the heirs. And it was a very complex heirship that involved half siblings. It basically involved half-blood cousins in the ascendancy on one of the grandparent moieties. So basically the estate gets broken up into four parts there. So half goes to the paternal family and half goes to the maternal family, and then half of that half goes to grandparent and each grandparent, so grandmother and grandfather. So essentially you have paternal, maternal kindred, paternal, paternal kindred, maternal, maternal kindred, and maternal, paternal kindred, and you have 4 different family trees. Well, it turned out that one of the grandparents had children outside of the marriage, a second marriage essentially, and had more descendants, so that her husband's family was excluded from the heirship. And this was a very unusual case that required us actually consulting with one of the professors in Texas of probate law, essentially the preeminent scholar. And yeah, and the forensic genealogist and the other attorneys couldn't agree at first on how this was going to resolve, and we ultimately agreed on it and proved it up. And that was, I think, last fall. And so it was about four and a half years from the start. Now, the case hasn't even distributed yet. It's still basically waiting for approval on distributions. So we're talking about over a 5-year period. It's probably
5 years already, right?
5.5 years already since the case started.
Let me ask you this. Yeah, let me ask you this, because what I'm hearing is that, okay, is there any other cases prior to yours that's currently ongoing right now that has been closed already that you can, see sample of, or sort of, I don't know what's the right legal term for it, but you know what I mean, right? Like has been.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've had cases that have we've been able to resolve in a year or so, and that's about the fastest that you can resolve a case that goes through the probate process. There's a process of filing the application, waiting a certain period of time after the citation posts or is published, depending on if it's an heirship or a will, and then having a hearing, and then the executor or the administrator publishing notice to creditors, allowing creditors to submit claims. Then you've got an inventory that needs to be filed. You've got to pay the claims. You've got to gather all the assets. You've got to pay taxes. Make sure all the tax returns that were supposed to be filed have been filed, because sometimes
it is tax. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes decedents don't pay taxes for a few years before they die, especially if they're elderly and they forget, right? Or they're having health problems, right? It's not uncommon to have a CPA or an administrator file 3 to 6 years of back tax returns. So you've got to reconstruct the tax returns, right? So the CPA's got to order tax transcripts, and they have to reconstruct the tax returns, file the tax returns, make sure that the taxes are paid, and just go through the process of making sure all the creditors are paid before the distributions are made, right? And that process, at the quickest is about a year if you go through the probate process. And yeah, it can take 3 to 5 years. That's fairly common on a court supervised administration, and if it's not court supervised, it can take between 1 and 3 years. I think that's pretty common. So if somebody has a trust plan, they might be able to do it in half that time, or even quicker than that. If somebody has a non-trust or sort of like non-probate succession plan, like they use payable on death beneficiary designations on bank accounts, or they use transfer on death designations on cash accounts, or they use beneficiary designations on retirement plans or their life insurance policies, then sometimes the payout can be pretty quick. But in those instances, they might actually have some asset protection advantages to actually have them funded through a trust, held in a trust, and receive them in trust. So, if somebody's going to receive a large brokerage account, rather than to actually just receive it outright, which is unfortunately what a lot of financial planners suggest to do. They'll say, basically most financial planners are sort of like told, make sure that all of your client accounts have a beneficiary designation on them, right? So their back office usually will remind them every year, hey, you have X number of accounts. Here's a list of accounts that don't have beneficiary designations. Go get them. So they'll go to their client and say, I need a beneficiary designation on your brokerage account. Well, it's several $1 million brokerage account, for example. And they say, I have 3 children. Make each of them a 1/3 beneficiary. Okay, fine. They do that. Well, the financial advisor basically persuaded them to do something that they really should have consulted with an attorney about, because it's really most likely advantageous for somebody to receive property in a trust rather than just outright, for a number of reasons. Asset protection is number one. So people think, okay, if I form a trust for myself, what is considered an inter vivos revocable living trust, that's going to give me some asset protection. And the answer is, that's not going to give you any real asset protection. If you're a settler of a self-funded trust like that, you are, and you have the ability to revoke the trust. In other words, it's not a irrevocable trust. It's something that you can just undo. It's really considered a disregarded type of trust, and it is though you are just managing your own property if you're the trustee. So until the trust becomes irrevocable, for the most part, it's sort of there are exceptions to everything, but the general rule is that if you still have control over it to a certain point, then you won't gather any asset protection. The moment that the trust becomes irrevocable, again, on a self-settled trust, there's a certain waiting period of time. You can't just make it irrevocable and then all of a sudden get asset protection. There's a look-back period. But when somebody receives property in a third-party funded trust, so for example, beneficiary receives property from their parent or their grandparent or their uncle or their aunt or a friend or something like that, and they receive it in a trust that was formed at that person's death, went irrevocable at their death, then they do receive some asset protection from it. And so rather than somebody receiving a brokerage account outright, let's just say it's $100,000. This is a kind of a perfect example. $100,000 brokerage account they receive outright. What do most people do with it? Well, they just consolidate it into their own brokerage account, or they cash it out, or they go and buy some property with it, or they pay some bills with it, or whatever. It becomes essentially commingled into their personal assets right away. Well, if they, we're not even concerned about tax at this point, but just asset protection. If they have any judgment creditors, if they have any IRS claims, if they have, if they're going to go through a divorce proceeding, for example, if they're going to get sued by anybody, then those assets can almost immediately be attacked and considered their personal assets. Right? If they receive them in a third-party settled trust, an irrevocable trust, then if it's set up correctly, then that can be exempt from the IRS, from creditors, and even from a divorce proceeding. So it's essentially a separate thing altogether. They can be a beneficiary of it. They can even be a trustee of their own trust. And if it was set up right, they have asset protection. Now, do they get any tax benefits from that? Probably not. There are also tax implications of owning property in a trust like that. The trust tax rates for income are higher, faster. So that's one thing. But for a savvy person who has good legal and tax and investment advice, they can invest in assets that don't really generate a tax footprint. So they can invest in assets that don't even generate income. They can invest in assets that return capital, or they can invest in assets that continue to grow without a tax footprint. So Berkshire Hathaway is like a perfect example of something that doesn't pay a dividend. It hasn't paid a dividend for decades. So there was a special dividend they paid a long time ago. But basically, we're talking about something that doesn't pay a dividend. So if somebody wants to invest in something like that, they can. And they can just basically pay long-term capital gains after they've held it for a year. So there are strategies that they can work with. Again, nothing that I'm saying is, legal or financial advice.
I want the listeners to know that
for information purposes. For the listeners to know, I'm not giving legal advice. Every single person is going to have a different requirement. Every single person is going to have a different situation. Yes, their circumstances are all going to be different. So it's important that your listeners know. Okay, listen, it's time to find an attorney, it's time to find a tax planner, it's time to find an investment advisor that I trust that can give me good advice, listen to my situation, and help formulate a plan for me.
It's not one size fits all kind of thing here. So I'll be sure I'll put the disclaimer on this. I always do anyway.
Yeah, it's unfortunately not a one
No.
size fits all scenario. So, typically when doing estate planning, I would sit and have at least a 1 to maybe 3 hour consultation with clients after they fill out a questionnaire, and the questionnaire is pretty extensive. It's going to ask family history, medical history, salary, savings, all the different asset classes they have, business interests that they have, property interests that they have, where the property is, and you really need to get a good picture of what this person's estate comprises of, and then you have to get an idea of what they want to happen to their property when they pass away, and how smooth they want that to happen, and if they want that to happen in stages or if they want that to happen all at one time. So, some people are very specific. I had one client who's an engineer, who's a computer engineer, and he said, I have a real specific way I want this distributed. And I want it distributed on a certain time frame. And I don't want it all to happen at once. And I want to place conditions on it. I want to make sure my beneficiaries have to work for it. I want them to earn it. I want them to, he basically said, I'm leaving to my grandkids and I want to make sure that they don't turn out to be spoiled brats, right? And I want them, I worked hard for my money. I want them to work hard for their money, and I want to reward them in stages. So I don't want them to get this all at once. I want them to get some when they graduate college, and if they go in the military, they go in the military, or if they go to college, I want them to have some milestone that I approve of, that I'm proud of them for. So, if my grandson joins the Marines and he gets out, then that's awesome, right? If I have a granddaughter that goes to college and she gets out, or she graduates art school, or she goes and does something, whatever. He said something real specific. This was really interesting. He said, I don't want them to be trustees of their own trust until they're 40 years old. Unless they become a CPA, a lawyer, or a financial advisor, professional.
Yeah, to earn it.
He said if they're a professional lawyer, tax advisor, financial advisor, they have a license and they can advise other people and they understand it, they can be their own trustee. So
how are you going to measure that?
Really cool. Turns out that he passes away, and 2 out of 4 of the grandchildren who were not studying anything in finance said, well, after I get my degree, or one guy went into the Marines, he said, after I get out of the Marines, I'm going to get my Series 7 financial license, and I'm going to be my own trustee at age 25, right? And they did it because they had that incentive. So if you sometimes placing incentives in these estate plans is actually really valuable. Cool. So yeah, really valuable. So I have another client who made some incentives that one of her beneficiaries went and graduated college. So the client herself said it's very important that this girl goes to college because her family didn't go to college. So I want her to be the first one in her family to go. I'm going to make an incentive. So she set several $100,000 aside and said she can go to college with this money. Whatever she doesn't spend on college, on credible college expenses, she can keep. But she has to earn the college degree before she's 30, and if she doesn't, it's going to charity. So that puts, that basically puts the pressure on, right? So, well, what could she do? She could go to, say, community college for 2 years, save as much money, save as much of that as she can, transfer somewhere, get a scholarship somewhere, and keep most of it, right? Or she could go and spend the money on expensive private college. That's her choice. And whatever's left over, she could use to buy, to make a down payment on a house or whatever. But it puts that incentives there. If she never goes to college at all, she gets none of the money. And ultimately, it's going to go to charity. So that's really cool. The other thing is, I've seen high net worth people say, I'm going to give my child $1 million. The rest is up to them. They're going to earn their own way in this world. But I want the other $2 or $3 million to be under their direction and I want them to be involved in charitable giving, and I want them to give $50,000 a year to some charity that's important to them. So it sort of makes them this trustee and benefactor to others. So yeah, there's all different ways I've seen people design their estate plans, and they're all more sophisticated than what the state has, which is just it goes to these
right.
people.
Beneficiary is gonna treat them like winning a lotto ticket or something, right? It's like, yeah, we're gonna spend it all. We're gonna buy a yacht. We're gonna buy this and that and this, and it's all spent on material things. And I think the education part of it is good. But yeah, this is good. Really valuable inputs from you, because I've heard some of that too before, by the way, and it's very eerie. It's more like I start thinking, oh wow, the children are just waiting around, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it can be really quite a disaster. So, and again, if somebody doesn't have a good plan and the children receive property outside of trust, then again, if they go through divorce, then once that property is, commingled, it's a bit easier for a divorce attorney to attack it. It can be, even though it's considered separate property when they receive it, if it, like in Texas, for example, income on separate property is considered community property. So if somebody receives an inheritance outside of a trust that keeps it separate, then it becomes part of their separate estate, but the income produced on that asset, that separate property, is part of the community property. And if they end up getting divorced, then their spouse can essentially gain a significant portion of the appreciation. So let's just say, for example, somebody receives $100,000 outside of trust, and they're married for 20 years, and that property is now worth $600,000 or $700,000. Well, the appreciation on it is all essentially, I mean, assuming it's income. Again, there's different classes of property, whether it's capital appreciation or income. The rules are a little bit different, but let's just say that they use it to buy real estate and it produces income. That income is going to be considered community property, and then so half of that income produced belongs to the spouse, and they don't know that. So if they had received it in trust and they had continued to use it to purchase property in trust, and they had done it properly, again, they have tax and legal advice along the way, they could have actually shielded it from the divorce in that situation. So there's all types of ways to do it. And again, usually the quickest, easiest way is not going to be the most advantageous way. So if somebody wants to leave a legacy, then the best thing they can do is to sit down with an attorney and say, I want to leave a legacy. How can you help me based on what I have? Right? It doesn't matter if it's $100,000 or if it's $10 million. $100,000 can turn into a significant legacy if the beneficiaries have their things together. Right. If they have their lives together and they're not going to need to spend it right away, it can continue to grow. It can continue to grow in a asset protection trust, for example, and it can be left to the grandchildren. So it can go to the next generation. So like I had a client and he came in and he said, look, I don't have that much. I have like $200,000. I have a house and I have some debt and there's a mortgage. But at the end of the day, my estate's worth about $200,000 and I want my son to get access to that. But I don't know it's going to help him very much, but he doesn't need it because he's doing okay on his own. But I really want it to go to my grandson. Okay, cool. Well, can set it up so that the son receives it in trust and manages it for the grandson, and then in 20 or 30 years gives it to the grandson and it's worth a lot of money. If the other thing that's really nice about the trust planning and trust titling is that when somebody gets a bank statement and they see it's got their grandparents' name on it, they're a little bit more conservative with the spending than if they receive it to themselves and it's in their own bank account, right? If it just gets dumped into their own bank account, it's just a lot easier to spend, like from a mental standpoint. But if they feel like they're protecting some family wealth, there's a certain pride about that in some instances. They see the grandparent's name on it. Every month when they get the statement, they're really, they're just sort of like, they're just the one that's, keeping it for the next generation. I saw, actually, it sort of reminds me of an ad for a watch company. It wasn't Rolex. I don't remember who it was. It was a luxury watch company. And it said something to the effect of, you don't really own one of these watches. You are just holding it for the next generation. Right? And that's a really cool mentality to have. Where if you look at inherited property as not really yours, but something that you're just holding on to and you're protecting and you're preserving for the next generation. And if the next generation does the same thing, then that's a really cool thing. That's a really cool legacy to be able to roll forward.
Okay, I have my microphone off for some reason. I don't know why. Hi. Hi.
Oh, I was just on.
Yeah. I was talking on my own, by the way. It's like, okay. Yeah. But yeah, very interesting. Before I forget, I was going to say, legacy, you mentioned that earlier, right? Legacy armor. When you were speaking, those two words came on my mind. We haven't touched base on the family abroad. I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming that's what we've been talking about, right? Just nationwide kind of thing. But I think we should call you back again for the part 2 for family abroad, because I think international. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually true. Okay, so I can, just briefly touch on that. So yeah,
Okay,
I've had estates that are transnational estates where you have beneficiaries in different jurisdictions. For example, I had a case where...
Or Indonesia, right?
Yeah, Indonesia. I've
My
had
mother
cases...
passed away, and then it was just a little bit... yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Inheriting property in foreign jurisdictions can be, quite an ordeal. And also, depending on the nationality and the citizenship of the beneficiaries, they might have tax implications in those other jurisdictions as well. So if you have property in other countries, it's also really important to talk to an advisor in those other countries. So on a case that I had, for example, involving beneficiaries in New Zealand and France and Canada and the UK, we had to hire an attorney in each of those jurisdictions to give us advice on how we were going to best handle that and how we were going to best design the succession plan. So again, yeah, it's also, interesting in some jurisdictions like Indonesia, non-citizens aren't necessarily able to hold property.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I learned that from last year. Exactly.
Right.
It has
So
to be WNI, WNA, Indonesian, and Asing, which is foreign.
Yeah, exactly right. Right, exactly. So, there are some limitations on the types of property that a foreigner could own. Sometimes the title, they're not able to own the same type of title. They have to sell it within a certain period of time. So there's all types of things like that that people don't consider. How is this going to impact? And then again, I had a client who had children that were French citizens, and if they would have received their inheritance in a trust, the French law is a lot different than the English common law system that we have in the United States. It's sort of at odds with it, and they basically don't look at the trust as a delayed instrument at all. They want basically an inheritance tax immediately on the full principal of the trust. So those kinds of things have to be structured as like business interests, and you have to have sophisticated tax planning where you're dealing with a lawyer in those other jurisdictions. So yeah, it's, again, if we sort of gamed it out, like what would happen if this guy did nothing and it was like $400,000 were going to be lost to taxes immediately.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, another situation was, client wanted to gift a large amount of property while he was still alive. He was not feeling well, and he wanted to make sure that his family members saw the property and enjoyed the property, and he wanted to get that benefit of giving them the property and watching them receive it and be happy. And we showed him what would happen from a tax standpoint if he did that, because he had basically a very low basis in the property, and they would pay basically there would be a very big tax consequence to that. Whereas if he waited until he passed away, they could receive a step up in the basis and then sell it and not pay taxes on it. And there was, again, we're talking about close to $1 million, capital gains tax that they would have to pay. It was outrageous. Yeah. So in that situation, figure out other ways to give them something, a gift that they can enjoy, rather than giving the property outright. And again, it's sort of like the whole concept of the tax planning and the trust planning is I don't know if it was Carnegie that said it, but like one of the old American magnates said something to the effect of, the ideal situation is to control property but not necessarily own it. So that's, again, something that a lot of times self-made people have a problem with understanding, is that they like the idea of giving property and holding property personally, and so you have to educate them on, well, there might be a better way to transfer the benefit to the property to the people you care about. They can become beneficiaries of the property, and it can be in a trust, or it can be in some type of a business entity, but you don't necessarily need to give it to them. They don't need to receive the title themselves directly. They don't have to have direct ownership over it. And getting people comfortable with that.
That's where you come in, right?
Yeah, exactly right. The lawyer really needs to have that kind of relationship and that talk and educate. And the best estate plans that I've done were ones that we spent more than a year working together to figure it out.
Wow.
So dealing with high net worth family and, taking very careful inventory of all their assets and their business interests and their property, their tangible property and their legacy heirloom type property, their gun collection, right, and their book collection and their jewelry collection.
There's like a folder of that my attorney that did that, Jerry Kessler, I think, he retired already, but he started as a probate attorney in Hollywood back in the 60s, 70s, and he goes like,
nice.
In so much heartbreaking cases, I'm done with that. So he decided to just kind of like low profile instead of the high celebrity profile and everything. Before I forget, I want to ask you these questions. Many of our listeners, Jason, are founders, mothers, and first generation wealth builders. So what sort of unique considerations should women leaders be aware of it when it comes to legacy planning?
Oh, that's really great. Okay, so I love that.
You mentioned quite a bit, a lot of your clients and everything, and I thought, I just want to throw in there as far as the mothers, first generation,
I love that. So, here's a really cool thing. Generally speaking, when counseling clients on estate planning and asset protection and tax planning, generally speaking, women seem to be more open to counseling. So they understand, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to be very open-minded about this. In many instances, men, they're very protective of the wealth. I think it just comes down to the differences in the way that we're gender normalized. So men have this protective nature, controlling nature, right? Need to be in charge of this. And women are a little bit more open-minded to really good estate planning and tax planning. So I've had conversations with guys and I've said, listen, I think the best thing for you is this, X, Y, and Z. And they would say, I don't really like giving up control like that. I don't really like giving up control like that. If I would say the same thing to a prospective client who's female, she would say, oh, that's really interesting. Okay. I understand that, right? A little bit more open-minded. So I would say for anybody, but women are really particularly good at this, especially if they're self-made and they're independent and they've got that sense of reliance and they have that motherly protectiveness.
I was going to say that motherly nurturing nature.
Yeah, that nurturing nature is to embrace that and to speak with a lawyer and listen. It's one of the most important things that you can do. It's one of the most important expenses that you have. And it's not necessarily that costly to get a second or a third opinion, right? I always say, listen, if you're going to a doctor and they tell you that you need, a certain aggressive surgery, you don't necessarily need to believe that right away. You can go and get a second opinion, and you can get a third opinion.
I always do third opinion.
I always do that too, right? I want a second, I want a third opinion. If I'm having a medical procedure done, I'll take a fifth opinion. Basically, if you get diverse opinions. And honestly, you'll get that in law as well. I mean, you can ask five different lawyers the same question, and you'll get 5 different answers, because there's more than one way to skin a cat, quite honestly, and there's lots of different ways to do it. Yep. So I would say, listen, for somebody who's self-made, who is a leader, who has a nurturing nature, to embrace that, to seek counsel, and to not necessarily take, the first opinion and run with it. When I take litigation clients, I typically say, listen, if I'm the first person that you're speaking to, I really don't want to take your case, because I don't think that you'll value me as an attorney. I want you to go and have at least 2 other opinions before you decide that I'm the right person for you, right? Because I want to make sure that we're really a good fit. And I'm honestly, I'm not necessarily going to agree to take the case anyways. I actually had one person, and she came to me and she said, look, I've got this probate case, it's contested, and I want you to represent me. And I said, how many other attorneys have you talked to? And she said, none. And I said, go get 2 other opinions. If you want to work with me, get a second and a third opinion. If you want to work with me, because I've got a specific idea how I'd handle this litigation. If you want my plan and you want to work with me, then call me back. And she called me back in about 6 weeks, and she said, I've talked to 2 others, and I want to work with you. And I said, that's great. Let's do it then. I get it. Estate planning is the same thing. So for the nurturing female leader, don't necessarily take the first attorney's plan that you deal with. Go take a consultation. A lot of attorneys will do free consultations on estate planning. They'll do like a 30-minute or hour-long consultation. Some charge an hour fee or a half-hour type fee. Like I know some will charge like $150 or $300 or $500 for an hour, right? Some will give you a 30-minute consultation for free. And listen to their plan and figure out, is this a person that I trust? Is this a relationship I want to have? Is this a person that I want to deal with in 5 years from now to update it? Is this a person that I want to deal with if I have a family issue? Is this a person I can trust with my deepest secrets? Because there really is that requirement to have full disclosure with the attorney.
And
so
trust.
If there's not a trust there, if there's not a trust there, it's not going to work. So I would say to the women, go get 3 opinions and figure out who you want to work with. I think that's always the best thing. Sometimes I've said that to men and they say, I don't want to do that. Let's just get on with it. Show me what you've got. Let's just cut to the chase, right? But I think women are like a little bit more open-minded to that, and then also I think the women leaders can be open-minded to what is going to be the best way to make sure their beneficiaries get access to this property, this wealth, but they are able to continue to develop unimpeded, and it doesn't cut their development. So you don't want to just give this exorbitant amount of money to somebody right away in one shot. You want to protect them and you want to give them money over time. So like, for example, okay, maybe they can get a certain amount of money now. Maybe they can get access to money for a down payment of a house or down payment on a business. or used for medical expenses. So like I had, for example, one woman, and she's self-made businesswoman, brilliant and very open-minded and nurturing mentality. And she said, I have 3 kids and 2 of them are on the right path. The other one needs a little nudge. How can we make that work in the estate plan? And we talked about it, and we figured out a staged way to provide incentives for the other child. And
just like the other one that you said about
just like the other
earn
one.
it.
Yeah, you have to earn it, right?
And so don't take everything at lump sum.
Cool. It was like this one was really cool. It was like, listen, you're going to be, and she wrote poetry and she journaled, and that became part of the plan that's sealed. So, okay, when she passes away, this is going to be read to the child. The child's going to read this. Okay, I want you to be the one responsible for scattering ashes in these places on this treasure map. And I want you to go and spend 1 week here, and I want you to go and spend 2 weeks here, and I want you to go and spend 1 week here. And I want you to journal, and I want you to take these classes, and I want you to do these things, and I want you to go through this discovery phase. And it was sort of like the Eat, Pray, Love book, right? Where she was sending this child on an adventure. And she sent this child on an adventure. And through the adventure, the child grows and then gets on track, right? It basically grows up through the death of the parent. And so there are creative ways to do that, in nurturing ways. Men usually aren't going to think like that, right? They're not going to, I'm going to draw a treasure map, and I'm going to have an adventure, and I'm going to have them journal, and I'm going to have them go do meditation and go to Bali and all this kind of stuff. No. But a woman, I think what I would say is this. We live in a time now where it's really great for people to embrace their genders, right? Their differences. And so I'd say to the women, embrace the femininity, embrace that nurturing mentality, and try to figure out ways that you can help the beneficiaries that are creative, and work with your attorney to do that. Because there are some spectacular things. There are, for example, things that some women would say, I wish that I had done this for my beneficiary when they were younger, or I didn't give them these things, or I have regrets about certain things, or they're really missing this part of their life, and I want them to experience that after I pass away, and can come up with that, right? Send them on an adventure. Make sure that they take certain classes. Make sure that they pick up certain hobbies. Make sure that they travel certain places. Like this one was scatter ashes across 5 different places, 3 different continents, places that were important to the woman.
I've heard that
those kind of nurturing things. Channel that energy through the estate plan. It can be quite beautiful. Yeah.
Well, how do you see your legal work as part of a much bigger mission? I guess what drives you beyond, this sort of contracts, clients, and codes and everything like that. I'm getting into, your passion, I guess, your purpose, I should say, the purpose behind this.
Well, I would say that the probate litigation that is most of my practice now gives me context to understand how important it is for people to do legacy planning. So when I have the opportunity to do a legacy plan for somebody, and we set it up in a way that's just quite beautiful, it's really rewarding to know that you're impacting not just their children, but probably generations
to come. Yeah.
Many generations to come, right? I remember one of my clients, he said, what would happen? He had a young son at the time. He said, what would happen if something happened to, like, my wife and I right now driving out of the meeting after this plan is in place? What would things look like for my son? And I said, it's a good question. And I walked him through what the trustee relationship would look like with his son, and how they would meet and how they would manage the assets. And it would be in a boardroom much like this, and there would be a CPA and there would be a financial advisor. And the way that we had this set up was really specific. There had to be all these things in place. And I said they would review his grades every year and make sure that he's receiving, the right amount of schooling, and if he's not excelling, that he's getting tutoring and that he's doing all of his extracurriculars. And he just looked at me. He said, "That sounds so Bruce Wayne-y. That's so cool." It just sounds like really like the way that Batman would have he was raised or something. Just to make sure that the kids are protected, right? Because again, it's really cool when it's set up in a way that it's going to impact their family pretty much forever. As long as the family is responsible with it, it's going to impact forever. So, perfect example, I'll give you this one. I have a client who was the sole heir to his grandmother's estate. And his grandmother was under guardianship in Texas. This was a Houston case. She was under guardianship in Texas. And as what happens in guardianships many times, they basically impoverish her. They spent all of her money, right? This is what happens when people don't have estate plans, when they don't have trust plans. They're placed under guardianship, and a guardian takes over, and the assets aren't managed the way that a person would have their assets managed if they designed a trust, most likely. And a lot of money is wasted and spent in court proceedings and fiduciary fees, and it's just not great. And he said, I think that there's more out there that the guardian didn't find. And I said, okay. And I said, we'll do some searching, and we'll look everywhere we can. We'll look like under every rock. So we'll look and see if there was any life insurance policies, any other brokerage accounts, any other bank accounts that weren't reported on the inventory. We looked at tax transcripts. We tried to find whether there were any other assets. We couldn't find anything. And then out of the blue, I get a call from somebody that says, I saw your probate proceeding, and do you still represent this client? I said, I do. And he said, I would like to buy his mineral interest in a mineral estate that I think belongs to him. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, his grandfather, not his grandfather, his great-grandfather, in 1955, had a mineral reservation that appears to have never entered the grandmother's estate. And it turns out that he was entitled to it. And this was a sizable mineral estate. And I called him up and I said, look, we got an offer. I'm telling you this with permission, by the way. This is, first of all, I'm changing some of the facts for the story purposes, and also I'm not divulging any client privileges. This is
sensitive,
to discuss. I have permission to discuss this part of it. But basically,
no names mentioned, please.
No names mentioned either. And the facts are changed a little bit.
Yeah.
Basically, and I have permission to discuss the story. But I said, look, we've got an offer to sell this, and I think it's a terrible offer. And he said, well, what is it worth? And I said, it's really hard to tell. But I feel that it's worth a lot more than what they're offering. And he said, well, I'm kind of inclined to take it because, that whole, one in the hand is better than, two in the bush or something like that.
Right.
I said, I think we need to hold out on this one. And we waited several years, and then production began on the well, and it was extremely awesome because that one mineral reservation from his great-grandfather in 1955, basically 70 years later, impacted him and his son. So great-grandchild and great-great-grandchild were impacted by somebody's legacy planning in 1955. And I can say it was legacy planning because in 1955, when he made the mineral reservation, and we're talking about fracking, right? We're talking about mineral interests, specifically gas pockets that are very far underneath the earth. In 1955, there was no known minerals there that could be explored, right? It would have been science fiction for somebody to say, I think that there's some value there. And in 1955, this man sat down with a lawyer and put together a sophisticated document reserving the non-participating royalty interest in this mineral estate. So he didn't retain the executive rights, but he didn't need to. He retained the non-participating royalty interest, okay? And he spent money to do that in 1955. So there was a possibility that if you shared that with a friend, they would have said, that's not worth the paper that you had it written on. You know, you wasted your money seeking a lawyer to draft this sophisticated document.
There's always a noise there. There's always a guarantee. Right.
And the cool thing about it is, so he does the sophisticated mineral reservation, knowing this in 1955. There is no way that it will benefit him in his lifetime. There is no way it will benefit his daughter in her lifetime. There is no way it will benefit his grandson in his lifetime. Oh, I'm so sorry. It was the great grandson. That's right. Wait, so yes, it was the great grandson that we're talking about, and the great grandson. Yeah, I said that correctly. Okay, so he knew in 1955 the technology today. So basically, it's science fiction. We don't know that there's anything there, right? We can't see it. They didn't have imaging technology and
all that cool stuff that we have right now.
Right, all the stuff we have now where they can look and the engineers can actually see these pockets of gas and things that can be explored, and then to actually have fracking technology where they can actually get them out, right? But in 1955, he knew there's no way this is going to benefit me. There's no way this is going to benefit my wife. There's no way this is going to benefit my daughter. Most likely, it's not going to benefit my grandson. It's going to benefit someone I'll never meet in my life. Ever. And his descendant. And that person's descendant. That's really like leadership legacy planning there, where somebody says, I'm setting this up not for somebody that knows me and loves me, that I know and love, but is going to be down the line. And I always say, like, it's kind of funny because there has to be like maybe a little bit of that kind of like I want
vision?
to set. Yeah, there has to be a vision.
A vision.
Set
a footprint up that you want to leave, because that's what legacy is, right?
Totally. You got to have that vision. So that's the kind of vision. So I like literally say to somebody, what kind of plan do you want to have? Do you want to have a plan where you just give the property as easy as possible to the person you care about now and you don't really care what happens to it after that? Or do you want a plan that is going to impact people 5 generations down the line? Right?
Yeah, right.
And if they say, I don't really care, I just want the property to be transferred easily to my offspring. And I say, I'm not the right guy for you. You know, you can go find somebody to do that very inexpensively. And you're going to get a plan that's not going to do much other than that. And you'll be lucky if the property is still there in 20 years, right? Most likely it'll get commingled with their assets. They're going to spend it. They're going to forget about it. They're not going to conserve it. But if you do a real plan, a real legacy plan, there is a very good possibility that it will be worth some serious money in 100 years from now, right? Because we know how compound interest works. Yeah.
So you're passionate about this. So before I forget this, I do have a question. Who has been your biggest, besides Solomon, I know you're going to say Solomon, biggest supporter or mentor, if you have any, a role model over the course of your entire career? I want to go back to you now, because I really want to circle back in. It's like, okay, want to just focus in, in your spotlight, basically, and highlighting your purpose and passion.
That's a great question. So yeah,
Who's been your biggest
mentors have always been really important to me. I actually formed really close relationships with a few law professors that taught me in school, and I still actually consult with them on cases, and I still seek their, not just about the technical substantive aspect of cases, but also on the how to deal with a certain client situation or how to deal with a certain ethical situation. How do we deal with this? How do we roll with this? And I've been really lucky there. So I actually would suggest to everybody to start recruiting your mentors when you're in school. Make close friendships as close as you can with professors. Show respect, ask questions, and let them know that you want their value in your life and your career. And I have made friends with college professors that I had as an undergrad and professors that I met in law school, and still meet and have lunch with them and email with them and talk with them.
Those are gems. Those people, they are gems.
One other person that's been really influential is a financial advisor that I was introduced to at a private bank, and he's been in the business for 4 decades. He's a little bit older than me, and he's extremely experienced. And again, that context is incredible. When you meet people who have incredible experience and incredible context, they've seen multiple financial cycles. They've seen, all types of things, basically. And
personalities and relationships. I mean, it will all come down to people, right? It all come down to people. We're not talking about just paperwork and paper and codes and contracts, but people, right? We're dealing with people. I mean, especially with people's assets, that they work for all their lifetime, right? I mean, that's where
definitely.
You come in.
Yeah, definitely. And the really other cool thing is, as part of the probate bar on contested cases, I get a chance to meet some people who primarily are in the estate planning space, and I get a chance to be their colleagues in an area where I have some expertise that they don't have quite the expertise, and then I get a chance to ask them cool questions and get them to help me out on planning things where they have a little bit more expertise. So, the thing is, it's, again, like we said before, it's not a one size fits all. And in some instances, I've realized when I talk to a new prospective client, I'm not the right person for them. There's somebody that's going to be better for their particular scenario. And then in some instances, I realize I'm the perfect person for them because I understand their scenario and their sensibilities just exactly right. So again, that's why I think it's really important for people to seek multiple opinions. And I say to people like, look, this plan that I'm designing for you is most likely going to work for the rest of your life. Unless you get divorced, it's not going to work, right? And we'll need to make some changes. And the other thing is there are conflicts of interest that are involved when planning for a couple. And so some planners will not work with both parties of a couple because both members of the marriage are their own person, and they have their own interests. And so there is a tension between their legal interest and their theoretical interest. And so I've had planning situations where I've represented one spouse and another attorney has represented the other spouse to do the planning. And that actually worked out really well too, because we got a chance to make sure that the plan was really fair for each of our clients individually. And there was one situation where I had a woman come to me and she said, I want you to do a plan for me and my husband. And I said, tell me more about your situation. And she was telling me about her situation. And I said, I can't do a plan for you and your husband. I don't think that's going to be the best thing for you. I will do your plan. I will be your estate planner. But your husband, my role was to protect you as well from anything that could happen within that relationship. And she's, oh, this wonderful. I never thought about that. I thought we had to work together. Well, yeah, it's really nice when people have marriages that are just spectacular and there's a deep level of trust and they're really, set up for a partnership for life, regardless of what happens. But the reality is, as well, to your female leaders, to your women leaders out there, is I would say, get their own counsel. Make sure they're working with their own lawyers. Make sure that their partners are not necessarily in those private meetings. That they have a attorney that's going to be looking out for their best interest, right? I would say that's also something really important. Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in.
Yeah,
and
true.
I think it's especially important for female leaders to make sure they protect themselves through that process, because it's not necessarily a good thing when a couple gets together. Again, I'm not giving legal advice here, but what I would say is it's not
Right.
necessarily a good thing when a couple does joint estate planning. So for the female leaders out there, especially ones that have, made their own way in the world and have their own wealth they've created, and if they're in a relationship, that's wonderful. But again, they should be looking at protecting themselves and their beneficiaries, especially in blended family situations. I had a situation where a woman, she came and she said, I want to do an estate plan with my husband. I said, why isn't your husband here? I'm just asking like a kind of a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
I know the reason. He either didn't want to be there, or two, she wasn't really ready to introduce him to the estate planning idea yet. And she said, well, I have a son from before the marriage, and I just want to make sure that my son's going to be taken care of. And I said, I'm not going to design an estate plan with you and your husband. I will be happy to design an estate plan for you. But my responsibility as your attorney is to protect you as my client. And if I have to design a plan for both of you, then you're not going to be protected the way that you need to be protected. And so we designed a plan. We designed a plan that was going to protect her son, which is what she really wanted. And her husband it's up to him to design his own plan. In that situation, he actually decided that he didn't want to do a plan. He thought it was going to be fine if he just, avoided it.
Yeah.
Which also shows the difference in values there, right? And again,
and the dynamics in the family too.
In the dynamics in the family, but that's not uncommon, honestly. I've seen this.
Yeah.
I've never actually had, believe it or not, I've never actually had a man come to me and say, I want you to do my estate plan, and I don't want you to. And I just want you to do mine, and I want to have my wife.
You don't want to include anybody.
Yeah,
the way I want it, right?
Most men are just not that thoughtful about it. For the most part, they don't really have like a vision about like legacy planning so much, unless they've been impacted
bottom
by
line
something.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. Bottom line.
This is what I want.
Yeah. Right. It's
Forget
not
about the
It's not
poetry.
so thoughtful. It's not so thoughtful, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, to your female leaders, embrace that divine femininity and create a plan that's just going to nurture and be a legacy vehicle for grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, because it can be substantial. Yeah.
One last question. I think that was a great respond to the questions and series of questions in that. But one last question is a tricky question, I promise. It's not that difficult here. Last one too. I always ask this. If you were to leave this world tomorrow, what message would you tell yourself? I want to go back to you, right, on this one. What message would you tell yourself, and why? Every time I ask these questions at the end of my sessions, there's always a pause. So it's not uncommon.
What
Yeah.
message would I tell myself?
If you were to leave this world tomorrow, Jason, what message would you tell yourself, and why? Take your time.
I would tell myself, everything's going to be okay. You set it up. You have a plan in place, and everything's going to be okay. Nothing to worry about now. And you know where you're going, so it's going to be okay.
Solomon is a lucky dude. He really is. He really is.
You know, it's funny. Yeah, I established my estate plan in, I think it was October of 2015. And I've revised it a couple times, you know.
Oh, you did?
Then.
Okay.
But, I mean, I've optimized it a little bit. But for the most part, it has been substantially the same since 2015. And I made some adjustments to it. I think maybe in 2017 when I learned a few more things, a few more tricks of the trade, and just to make sure that he's, you know, really taken care of in the most optimal way.
Okay.
And yeah, I would just say, you know, everything's going to be okay.
That's good. That's good. I like that. I've had mine 2012. Never change it. That's why I kind of hesitate. It's like, oh wow, you make revision.
Well, I made revisions because I learned a new technique.
Yeah.
If I had known about that technique in 2015, I would have implemented it then. And there have been some changes to the tax law. So the Secure Act came out, and so there are different ways that retirement accounts are treated now. You can't do a lifetime stretch like you could before. So yeah, there's basically like 2 tiers of beneficiaries now, and you can do a 5 or a 10-year stretch. But before, you could do a really lengthy stretch based on the actuarial life of the beneficiary inside the trust. And there was some awesome ways of doing it. That tax loophole's been closed essentially.
How often do they change? Do you know?
Yeah,
5 years. Or just depends on the leadership?
Almost every administration.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I meant by that. Every administration will change, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know that the long-term stretch retirement account is going to ever be brought back, but you know, I still think that if people have those legacy IRA trusts, they should keep them, and if they can't be used in the most optimal way, then, you know, whatever the new law is, you know, it's tough on that. You know, Secure Act changed a lot of things, but for the most part, as far as like dynasty trust provisions, the law hasn't really changed substantially in the last 10 years on that. So again, I learned something different. So what some people were doing was just, you know, using an inter vivos revocable living trust and just giving outright gifts to somebody, or to make it irrevocable, and then it terminates at their life, and then you can do dynasty type of provisions, which are better. So I updated with dynasty provisions, and I like to use those. Even on there was a client that wanted just a will. They didn't want to do trust planning in the sense that they didn't want to retitle all their assets and that sort of thing. And so we did a dynasty trust inside their will. So that's called a testamentary trust. That's another option if somebody wants to just kind of bring something into effect. There are a lot of options. I mean, there's so many ways to skin the cat. There's so many ways, so many paths to Rome that, you know, I would say, like, just especially your female leaders who are interested in legacies, you take multiple consultations and find a lawyer who is really thoughtful and really trustworthy, and Make sure that you've got a really good team. You've got a CPA, or you've got a CPA firm that
That's
you
the first
trust.
thing, legal and
Yeah.
CPA.
CPA, and you got a good financial advisor who looks
Yeah,
out for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
You know,
That
that you
really cares
trust.
for you,
That really
that
cares for
knows
you.
your
Yeah.
lifestyle, that knows you,
Exactly.
that trust,
Exactly.
you can trust, basically. It's a
Exactly.
trusted team, basically.
If you've got those three people on your team, if you have a CPA, a lawyer, and a financial advisor, you're doing
Exactly.
really well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, those are three people. My final thought on this, that you don't need to be wealthy to protect the legacy.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you just need to be willing and be open-minded, like you said, and have this open, first before you, narrow it down to one, obviously, and have a trusted team of people, right? What Jason reminded us today is this: leadership shows up in the quiet decisions, what we leave behind, who we protect, the legacy that we want, right? And how we prepared we are to face for the unknown. I think that's an important piece of that. So in crisis, leadership is tested, but in planning, leadership is very well defined. I think, I learned quite a bit from this really session with him, with Jason. Yeah. One last word, Jason, before we wrap it all up. I think I learned quite a bit. Yeah. One
I
last
love
word.
it. I love
Yeah,
it.
one last word from you.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You don't need to be wealthy to do legacy planning. In fact, I always say, look, even if you're leaving $50,000, if you leave $50,000 in a thoughtful way, it can be a legacy. It really can. Even if it's $25,000, it can be a legacy. It doesn't really matter. But if you leave $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, that's substantial. And it can be a legacy, $1 million. It can be a legacy immediately, and it can be a huge legacy in 30 years from now, right? Imagine $1 million growing for 30 years in market investments, in tax advantage, type of structure. That can be substantial and can provide a tremendous amount of support and protection for your descendants or your loved ones. If you don't have descendants, but you have loved ones you want to protect. So, and again, I think it just takes that vision where somebody says, look, I want to make sure my family is protected down the line. And when it becomes important to you to protect people who are even beyond the people you know in this life and in this world, that's even really special, I think. I think that's really special. Again, my client, he knows his great-grandfather built this for him. It's cool.
That is cool.
It changed their life because they were able to buy a new house.
Yeah.
Or they were able to build a house from scratch, build their dream house, and they were able to, finance their dreams and, make sure that their son goes to college now without any problem. And just to have their finances be made secure by just this beautiful act in 1955, some legacy planning in 1955, it's pretty amazing. The other thing, the way that it was structured, it was private and it was undiscovered by a guardianship court that would have just decimated it. They would have sold it for nothing.
Yeah, like I said earlier, right? Because it's just yeah.
Yeah, I think especially your female leaders are with their embracing their maternal, nurturing, divine feminine energy are going to just do great with this. I think they're going to go and find a trustworthy attorney that they can work with. I would recommend, like I said, multiple opinions, and just make sure that they find someone they really, really trust to build them something nice.
I want to take this time to thank you, Jason. I know you're a busy man. You travel. In fact, I haven't asked you, where are you currently? I know you're not here in the U.S. Are you in the U.S.?
No, not in the U.S. So yeah, I've been in Japan actually.
Yeah, you're in Japan.
I took Solomon to Japan for his birthday, and got a ski lesson, and it was just really spectacular. Yeah.
Oh, give him a hug for me.
I will.
And it's late night over there, I'm pretty sure, right? In Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
It's it's late night right now.
It's late. Yeah. It's.
So I really appreciate you, giving us the time to, allowing us to sort of dive into these questions and probing about learning really about all of these things, ins and outs, legacy especially, because I'd love to hear those things. And I want to welcome you back, and perhaps invite you back. Invite you back to follow up perhaps later on or something like that, if you have the time available for us again. So I thank you.
I'm honored to chat with you about anything. I mean, it's like, it doesn't feel like any time has passed, to be honest. Like, we've been talking almost 2 hours, and it's like
we did 2 hours.
Feels like 5 minutes,
I know. When we do these interviews things, when I get into it and everything, 1 hour past 2 hours is always, oh my goodness, So I really want to thank you once again. We appreciate your time, appreciate your insights and your valuable experiences, really, your journey that you share with us. It's just been very, very insightful, very inspiring, to say the least. So until next time, you guys, stay ready, stay bold, and always live with purpose. I should say this, until next time. Sawadee ka. I don't know what in Japanese. Sawadee ka in Japanese. Arigato. Yeah. Arigato. Arigato. Yeah. So thank you, Jason. You stay well, and then give Solomon my hugs. Happy birthday to him. And hopefully we meet again soon. When you're
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
I'm counting on that.
I can't wait. Have a beautiful day today.
You too. Stay well. And then thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you so much. And listeners, I also appreciate your time. I know you're busy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night now. I have to put on my glasses. I know I look goofy because I cannot see that. I cannot see what's what that I need to do. But how are you? You're okay? You're good?
I'm great, actually. Yeah, I'm great. I'm really happy to be here with you, Nikki. It was really, really cool to see you in person a few months
Was that a fluke or what? That was a fluke, wasn't it?
That was awesome. That was cool.
All the way in Southeast Asia. Who knew, right?
I know. It was really cool. It was just one of those chance meetings. And it's lovely.
How did you find out, by the way? Oh, you were on the social media, and you said, wait, I saw your picture. Are you in Bangkok?
Yeah, I hadn't seen a posting of a story from you in a really long time on Instagram. And then all of a sudden, I see you were posting at a temple, which looked like Bangkok. And I said, where are you? And you said, I'm in Bangkok. And I said, where in Bangkok? And you said, Sukhumvit 39. I said, I'm right around the corner.
Right around the corner.
I'm right around the corner. Let's have coffee tomorrow.
I know. Cool. And then the Starbucks is just right around, walking distance from where I was staying. But,
yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah. It's absolutely
And then
brilliant.
You know what? First of all, before we go on, I was going to record this and just back up kind of thing. But how is Solomon? How is the big guy?
He's doing great. He's doing really, really great. Yeah.
Is he still saving those I still have his paper GUN.
Absolutely. He has his papers, and he runs around the house and plays with them and simulates destroying me, every opportunity he can get. So yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, he's an enthusiast.
Oh yeah, nug enthusiast, you mean? I spell it backwards because people are backwards these days. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I thought about him every time, and I don't know if you know, but I sent you a copy of a link that I just saw on the what they wrote up about. Did you see that?
I saw the press release. I love it. Fantastic.
And I'm like, okay.
Congratulations on that.
I'm sorry?
Congratulations on that. That was so special.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It is special. I mean, I never make a big I never make a big stink about it and stuff like that. But then just, when I saw that and I'm like, okay. So not about me. It's about you. You're man of the hour. And so, and then, right. I put together the title. I don't know if you like the title because it's, we try to make a title that is in align with the theme of the podcast about leadership and all of that. So I hope you like it. Did you see the title?
I love it.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about. I don't recall what we talked about before. I think it was just more of, trying to dive into what you're doing currently, right? But then the audio didn't. The audio was messed up, I think, right? Isn't that what we?
Yeah, that was quite problematic. We were there in Starbucks, and it was really loud, and we didn't have, good recording equipment, so we just had the opportunity to kind of do like a trial run, and it was just so much fun. And then when the iPad actually ran out of battery, that was also fun.
Oh my goodness, that's true. I remember that. The iPad was running out. That was the second backup, by the way. I remember the first one.
Yeah.
Was the, and you know who we had for the our videographer is actually Solomon.
Yeah, that was so cool. It was so cool. Honestly, like I love situations like that where things just don't go perfect and
impromptu.
Yeah, you just kind of roll with it, and you have fun, and you learn from it, and that's what it's all about, really. So, yeah.
It's just raw, isn't it?
Yeah. We got a chance to talk through some things, and it was great. I enjoyed it a lot.
But what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of those like really incredible chance opportunities where you and I are in the same place at the same time, halfway around the world, right? And I only saw that you were there like by chance of opening up Instagram, and I probably only look at Instagram once every 2 weeks or something. I don't have notifications from it, and I don't really use it for anything other than look at travel stuff, And so I opened it up that day, and lo and behold, you had a story that was posted, and you hadn't really posted a story in a really long time, I don't think. And I saw you were at a temple, and I said, this is just so cool. Like, okay, we have to have coffee. This is great. Let's do this.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, Solomon loved it.
Yeah, likewise. He's like, oh yeah, my son is here with me. And it's like, oh my gosh, really? Bring him along. And I was just anticipating to see him, meet with him. But you know what? The reason why I was on the social media, because my sister was like, you're where? In Bangkok. Why don't you just let me know that you are? Because I want to go meet you. So she was just like you too. It's like, I got to meet with you. Because I didn't tell anybody I was there. But Solomon, yeah, that was the highlight of it. It's like when you text it, it's like, yeah, Solomon wanted to meet with you. And I go, oh, you're traveling with him too.
Well, he saw your very first Zumba dance video.
Oh, so no. Which one?
The very first one that you posted years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
My mom just died, right? Passed away.
That's right.
One?
That's right.
Because that's the very first time that I ever okay, I'm going to come out from, I'm just going to share the world that I know I'm taking a lesson. I don't know how to dance, but I'm taking a lesson.
It was just beautiful. And he said, she's so cool, She's so cool. You have the energy of somebody who's like 13 or 14 years old, and it's got that, like, you have that sort of wonder about you. Like, you're still curious, you're still in awe of things, like you're learning things for the first time, you're having fun. And most adults just lose that joy. They just don't have that anymore, And it was really precious to see that. So when he saw that, he was like, I'm in love with her, She's awesome. and
Thank you.
you were just having a good time. And
I was.
yeah, and so yeah, you were kind of like a legend at that point. And then he said, a long time ago, he said, how are we going to meet her someday? And I said, well, we'll meet her
He
when we're
asked for
out in
that.
LA. Yeah, when we're out in LA, we'll meet her. And yeah, we haven't been in LA in a while, so it just turned out really, really fortunate. We followed, when you were, we followed your stories when you were here right after your mom died as well, and you were here with your sisters, and
In Bali.
you're in Bali, and we were in Bali at that same time. So I want to say we were in Sanur, and you were in like Uluwatu or something, or Nusa Dua.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so it was, we didn't have the opportunity to meet at that time. That was your family time. You needed to have that family time.
That's after my mother passed away, and then the girls
Yeah.
haven't met each other for decades also. And then we decided, it's one of those things when siblings, got on their life gets in the way kind of thing. And then we're scattered everywhere anyway. And, I don't have any excuse for my older sister. She's in Austin, but the other one travels Southeast Asia with her husband, all of this. And she loves Southeast Asia. I mean, she's based out of Singapore now. She traveled Bangkok, Thailand. She's like the travel expert. If I ever wanted to, and then like, hey, what's what? And then she'll let us know what's what, basically. But yeah, I was just like you said. I mean, this is the impromptu kind of thing. It's always the best, when when it does happen. But,
Absolutely.